Batman's Rogues Gallery is easily one of the most iconic in comics, with the villainous group receiving a litany of solo content over the years. Batman. One Bad Day was another series following that tradition, spinning off from the ever-iconic Batman, the Killing Joke comic. The series sought to unpack the psychology and circumstances that crafted 8 of Gotham's deadliest foes, and writers like Tom King and G. Willow Wilson stepped up to bat for the title. What ensued was a series that started off a bit rough, but quickly found its footing to produce hit after hit. One Bad Day was nominated for several Eisner Awards, with one issue even taking the acclaimed prize of Best Single Issue One-Shot Home. For better or worse, the series was experimental and produced some intriguing stories about the minds of Gotham's most wanted. Two-Face's tale didn't benefit the character. It's been common for Two-Face to get the shorter end of the stick when it comes to previous Bat-Rogue anthologies such as Joker's Asylum. From being flat-out excluded to having questionable writing, this pattern unfortunately persisted in the character's One Bad Day story. This issue gave us a story with little interest in Two-Face's character, despite heavily referencing previous stories that defined him. This comic took Harvey Dent's father, who was horribly abusive to his son, and shaped the child's worldview because of it, making him into an average man that Harvey victimized to prove a point. Two-Face was also depicted as a lost cause that Batman seemed to be wasting his time on, with the character Stephanie Brown even commentating on this with a harshly negative outlook on Bruce's old friend. This outlook is validated by the story's ending too. The comic had a nearly cynical perspective on Batman's mission of rehabilitation, while doing a disservice to the character it promised to explore. For that, it is unquestionably One Bad Day's weakest story. 7 Riddler's issue was polarizing and out of character. The Riddler's tale in the One Bad Day lineup may have kickstarted the series and won an Eisner, but it did so with very mixed opinions from fans. Some were appalled at the darker take on Riddler, while some enjoyed the story's themes and art. The fan reaction was similar to the character's depiction in Tom King's run on Batman, the same author as this comic, who has often portrayed the character in a bloodthirsty manner. The story has overwhelming grit that feels out of place with a lead character like Riddler, who is typically on the more zany side of villainy. Some aspects of the story's premise are strong, such as the mystery of Riddler's overnight change in behavior and his new origin. Still, the execution comes off as King trying to overcompensate for a character seen as ridiculous in the modern day. From maiming security guards to rising to the top of Gotham with mere threats, this version of Riddler feels menacing in a way only a moody teenager would entertain. It's a decent attempt at building a meta-narrative around Riddler's change as a character in recent years, but other One Bad Day stories did a much better job analyzing their title character's evolution. 6. Catwoman's comic was rushed and didn't suit her. Of all the characters selected for this lineup, Catwoman was an odd choice. Almost none of the other Gotham rogues had any kind of solo series at the time to give them the solitary focus needed for this type of story. However, Selina Kyle had an ongoing series penned by Teenie Howard, released at the same time. Still, there never is too much of a good thing when it comes to Gotham's resident cat burglar. Unfortunately, when the book came out of a small blizzard of delays, it was just an okay story that needed another round of polish to become something truly great. Catwoman's roots as an anti-establishment character were given justice. The themes regarding an item's true worth were impactful, and the leading lady's charm was infectious. But like an unflattering dress, the story Catwoman was slotted into did not suit her. With messy pacing and a rushed ending, the story of Catwoman, One Bad Day would have been best suited for a miniseries. 5 Ra's Al Ghul's Bad Day presented a pleasant surprise. This issue of One Bad Day, delving into the murky origins of the Demon's Head, was a surprise hit, with writer Tom Taylor understanding what made the anti-villain Ra's al Ghul tick. Ivan Reis's art on one of his final DC projects before leaving the company did not disappoint either, making for a lavish reading experience. Unraveling the methods that Ra's will take to ensure a better future for the world, and exploring the what-if scenario of the character's victory, this story was compelling and brutal, though it overplayed its hand with the fake-out death of a major character in the story's back half. While the One Bad Day stories take place out of continuity, making this character's demise plausible, it happened far too fast to truly stick in the reader's mind, as it was quickly undone. There's also a shocking and quite disappointing absence of Talia al Ghul in this issue, as Ra's relationship with his daughter could have been a great story all on its own. But the inclusion of Damian Wayne coming to blows with his grandfather was a welcome addition regardless. 4. Penguin had an entertaining underdog story. After a weak start to the series with Riddler and Two-Face's stories, the Penguin's One Bad Day issue was a welcome reprieve from mundanity. Seeing Penguin claw his way up from the bottom as an underdog to reclaim his criminal empire was remarkably satisfying. This achieved something few had, the reader rooting for Cobblepot to win. While thematically similar to previous stories centered around the character that followed a familiar formula, this comic stood out due to its fresh premise and fun supporting cast. The main highlight of this tale was seeing Penguin's refined persona being slowly tested, but never snapping due to his unfortunate underdog position. He's not in much of a spot to pull too many strings or push people around, so seeing him rely on his wit, gentlemanly airs, and a touch of luck was a nice change of pace compared to him playing the role of top dog in Gotham's underworld. The issue's ending was particularly cathartic in that it saw this facade immediately snap, having Penguin become the figurative animal he is so often described as. 3. Bane's tale was a love letter to the villain. Another story in this series that played with the idea of the meta-narrative, One Bad Day. Bane tapped into the limited public perception of the villain. Many years after his prime, Bane is an old man reduced to reenacting his most iconic moment in cheap wrestling rings, as a simple grunt breaking the bat repeatedly. This issue is a beautiful story about a man past his prime, going into what it feels like to have peaked early in one's life, with no current feats coming close to their past accomplishments. Yet, the story did not languish in Bane's misery. The man is brought back into action when he learns Venom, the drug that once gave him his superhuman strength, is being mass-produced again, so he goes out of his way to shut the operation down. Not missing a beat to bring the meta-commentary full circle, the story's villain is someone who wants to reduce him to a venom-addicted husk of himself, which makes his defeat at the hands of a mature, developed Bane all the more satisfying. With twists and turns that made the story memorable, this issue of One Bad Day felt like a real love letter to the title character. 2. Mr. Freeze's tale was cold and compelling. Mr. Freeze is not known for having many iconic comic stories. There's been some here and there, such as his appearance in Gotham Central or his 1997 one-shot, but he tends to coast off of the success Batman, the animated series, granted him. However, this isn't to say there are no great comics for him. This one-shot was evidence of that. Victor's One Bad Day one-shot told the tragic tale of a man frozen in time, desperate to hold on to the memory of something long gone. However, his grief doesn't make him a saint, with Freeze being shown as a deeply flawed man throughout the story. He handled his grief in a way that was possessive yet relatable, as nobody wants to let those they love go. However, grief is not made into something with uncomfortable and obsessive undertones, which defined the New 52 iteration of the character. Rather, this interpretation of the character existed squarely in a moral gray. Mr. Freeze cares deeply about his wife, but he is so self-destructive and possessive that his love for her manifests in ways that only hurt others. One Clayface's story was an unforgettable triumph. Of all the other stories, Clayface's One Bad Day issue was the only one bordering on flawless. This story was perfect on every level. It redefined a character whose history has been messy at best, with spectacular art packed with intricate details to match its writing's nuances, providing biting insight into modern Hollywood. It followed the making of a fictional movie that came off as a parody of films like Joker, satirizing how movies that adapt real-life stories can be insensitive and sensationalized. Basil Karlo tried to get a role in the film legitimately, only to be rejected, causing the shapeshifter to go on a murderous rampage, killing actors, crew members, and the producer of the film in a massacre that harkened back to memorable B-grade slasher flicks. But that's nothing to say about the character of Basil Karlo himself. He barely has an identity, a man defined by the faces he can take but never own. This story goes into the deep anger and insecurity that comes from this, giving Clayface a characterization that won't be easily topped anytime soon.